Have you ever had that feeling? Like you're making a decision and you just know deep down it's not the right call, but for some reason you just keep going.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. You're talking about that little voice inside that's screaming, no, but you say yes anyway.
Yeah, like there's this invisible force pushing you in a direction you don't even want to go in.
Well, today we're going to unpack one of those forces. It's a fascinating mental quirk called the anchoring effect. And it's explored in depth in this book we're deep diving into, The Mind's Mirror, Understanding and Overcoming Cognitive Biases.
So cognitive biases, those are kind of like mental shortcuts, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes those shortcuts lead us to make, shall we say, less than optimal choices,
Exactly. They're like these ingrained patterns of thinking that our brains use to simplify complex information and make quick judgments.
which is helpful, I guess, in a fast-paced world where we're bombarded with decisions all the time.
Right, but the problem is these mental shortcuts can sometimes lead to systematic errors in our thinking, like the anchoring effect.
So fill us in. What exactly is the anchoring effect?
It's basically our tendency to over-rely on the first piece of information we receive, even if it's totally irrelevant to the decision at hand.
Okay, so even if that first bit of information is totally bogus, it can still mess with our choices. That's wild.
It really is. Think of it like this. That initial piece of information acts like an anchor, and it weighs down our judgment, pulling it in its direction, even when we know, logically, that the anchor shouldn't have any influence on our decision.
I'm starting to get a little nervous about all the bad decisions I might have made because of this sneaky anchor. Can you give us a real-world example to make this a little clearer?
Sure. Think about retail pricing. Have you ever noticed how stores will often mark down an item from an outrageously high price to a seemingly more reasonable price?
Oh, all the time. Like that sweater that was originally $200 but is now on sale for $100.
Exactly. Now, $100 might still be a lot for that sweater, but it suddenly feels like a bargain because you're anchored to that initial $200 price tag.
I totally fall for that. Seeing a huge discount always gets me excited, even if I don't really need the item.
That's the sneaky part of anchoring. It plays on our emotions, making us feel like we're getting a good deal, even if we're not.
This is making me think about salary negotiations. Is that a situation where the anchoring effect can come into play?
Absolutely. Imagine you're interviewing for a new job, and the employer throws out a low-ball salary offer first. That initial number can become an anchor, making it harder for you to negotiate a higher salary, even if you know you're worth more.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So knowing about this anchoring effect is already making me feel a bit more empowered, like I can spot those anchors and not let them drag me down.
Awareness is definitely the first step, but there's more we can do to loosen the grip of these anchors.
Tell me more. How do we break free from this anchoring effect?
One effective strategy is to actively seek out alternative perspectives. Don't just rely on the first piece of information you encounter. Do your research, gather data from multiple sources, and consider a range of viewpoints before making a decision.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
It's like getting a second opinion before making a big purchase or a life-changing decision.
Exactly. It's about expanding your perspective and not letting yourself be swayed by that initial anchor.
So basically, don't get hooked by that first shiny number. Look around, compare, and make sure you're not being swayed by a sneaky anchor.
Exactly. Question everything, gather more information, and make those decisions based on a solid foundation, not just an arbitrary starting point.
I like it. Forewarned is forearmed, as they say.
Now that we've got the anchoring effect covered, are you ready to move on to another fascinating bias that can trip us up?
Oh, absolutely. Hit me with it. Okay, so we've talked about the anchoring effect and how it can lead us astray. What's the next mental quirk we're going to tackle?
Well, let's talk about the confirmation bias. It's this sneaky little tendency we have to favor information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Oh, that sounds familiar. I think we all know someone who's guilty of that. They only read news sources that agree with their political views, for example.
Right, exactly. And it's not just limited to politics, of course. It can pop up in all sorts of areas of life. We tend to seek out information that makes us feel good about what we already believe.
It's like we're building these little echo chambers around ourselves where we only hear the voices that agree with us.
It's very much like an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And it can be a real obstacle to having productive conversations and finding common ground with people who hold different perspectives.
Because we just end up talking past each other
Right.
instead of actually listening and trying to understand the other side.
Exactly. We dismiss anything that doesn't fit into our existing worldview. And that can really hinder our ability to learn and grow.
So knowing about this confirmation bias, how do we avoid falling into that trap?
Well, the first step is, as always, awareness. Just recognizing that you have this tendency to seek out confirming information can help you catch yourself in the act.
So like taking a step back and asking ourselves, am I only reading this because it agrees with what I already think?
Right. And then the next step is to actively seek out information that challenges your beliefs.
That sounds uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm ready to do that.
I know it can be tough, but trust me, it's worth it. Because if you only ever surround yourself with information that confirms your existing beliefs, you're not really growing or learning, are you?
I guess not. So like if I tend to read liberal-leaning news, I should maybe try reading a conservative publication once in a while.
Exactly. Expose yourself to different viewpoints. Even if you don't agree with them, it's helpful to understand where other people are coming from.
That's a good point. Okay, I'm willing to give it a try. But it still sounds like it takes a lot of effort. Is there anything else we can do to make it easier to overcome this confirmation bias?
Well, another helpful strategy is to practice intellectual humility.
Intellectual humility. What does that mean exactly?
It basically means acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that you might be wrong about some things.
That's a tough one. Nobody likes to admit they're wrong.
I know, but it's so important because if you're approaching every conversation with the attitude that you're right and the other person is wrong, you're not going to be very open to hearing their perspective.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
So it's about being more open-minded and approaching discussions with a willingness to learn.
exactly. Ask questions, listen carefully, and be open to the possibility that you might change your mind.
This is giving me a lot to think about. So far, we've talked about the anchoring effect and now confirmation bias. These cognitive biases are pretty sneaky, aren't they? Always working behind the scenes, influencing our thoughts and decisions. What's next on our list of mental quirks? So we've tackled the anchoring effect and the confirmation bias. Those are pretty eye-opening. What other cognitive biases are lurking in the shadows of our minds?
Well, have you ever experienced that I knew it all along feeling?
Oh, all the time. Like after an election or a big game, I'm suddenly an expert at predicting the outcome, even if I had no clue beforehand.
That's the hindsight bias in action. It's the sneaky tendency to see past events as more predictable than they actually were.
So basically, we're rewriting history to make ourselves look smarter.
In a way, yes. It's like our brains are trying to create a nice, neat story, and once we know the ending, it's easy to fill in the gaps and convince ourselves we knew it all along.
I see. So it's not just about making ourselves feel good. This hindsight bias can actually prevent us from learning from our mistakes.
Exactly. If we think we knew it all along, why bother analyzing what went wrong? We miss out on valuable opportunities to learn and grow.
Okay, that makes sense. So how do we combat this I knew it all along syndrome?
One helpful strategy is to keep a record of your predictions before an event happens. That way, you have an objective measure of your foresight.
Oh, like writing down my thoughts on who's going to win the Super Bowl before the game.
Exactly. It's like creating a time capsule of your predictions. Then you can compare your pregame predictions with the actual outcome and see how accurate you really were.
I like it. It takes the guesswork out of it. What else can we do to outsmart our hindsight bias?
Another powerful tool is to actively seek out information that challenges your initial assumptions.
So, like, if I think a certain team is going to win, I should also look for reasons why they might lose.
Right. It's about being open to different possibilities and not just cherry-picking evidence that supports your initial hunch.
This has been a fascinating journey into the world of cognitive biases. It's amazing how much our brains rely on these mental shortcuts, even if they sometimes lead us astray.
It's true. Our brains are complex, and these biases are just part of how they make sense of the world.
But now that we know about them, we can start to watch out for them and make more informed decisions.
Absolutely. And if you want to dive even deeper into this subject, I highly recommend checking out The Mind's Mirror, Understanding and Overcoming Cognitive Biases. It's full of insights and strategies for navigating these mental quirks.
Yes, it's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to understand the hidden forces that shape our thinking. And that's it for our cognitive bias deep dive. We hope you enjoyed the journey. Remember, awareness is the first step towards change. So keep those minds sharp and stay curious, listeners.